We now move to the programme motion. Programme motion to be moved formally.
I beg to move.
The question is as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Bill, consideration of Lord's amendments.
No.
I can inform the House that nothing in the Lord's amendments engages Commons financial privilege. We will begin with the Government motion to agree the Lord's Amendment 1, with which it will be convenient to consider all other Lord's amendments as on the selection paper. I call the Minister to move the motion. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I am delighted that the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Bill has returned to this House for consideration of Lord's amendments. I thank members of both Houses for their careful scrutiny and for the constructive and collaborative approach that has taken place throughout the bill's passage. I also place on record my thanks to Baroness Chapman of Darlington for leading the bill expertly through the other place. In today's debate, we will seek to address the amendments that were made by the government there, and I also thank all of those in the other place who have been involved in debates on this bill. Before I speak to the amendments, I want to remind the House that the passage of this bill is a vital part of delivering the UK's international obligations under the BBNJ agreement. It will strengthen the global framework for protecting biodiversity in areas of the ocean beyond national jurisdiction, improve how we manage environmental impacts in these areas, and help ensure that the benefits arising from marine genetic resources are shared fairly. I am pleased to inform the House that as of the 17th of January, the BBNJ agreement has now entered into force. Following royal assent of this bill and subsequent secondary legislation, which will be passed in the coming months, the UK will ratify the agreement and intends to play a leading role at the first Conference of the Parties, which will take place at some point before the 16th of January 2027. Turning to the amendments from the other place. Today the House is asked to consider a package of 12 amendments, all of which were put forward by the government. These amendments relate to devolution and are designed to support effective implementation of the BBNJ agreement across the whole of the United Kingdom, while respecting the devolution settlements and ensuring that devolved ministers are appropriately engaged where devolved competence is affected. I'm very happy to give way.
Speaker, can I thank the Minister for what the Minister is putting forward. I know that Part 2 of the bill contains a specific exception for fishing and that the new regulations do not apply to the use of a UK craft for fishing if it is done under a valid licence under the Fisheries Act 2020. I've been contacted by some of the organisations back home in Northern Ireland, and so does the Minister not agree that it's essential that the devolved administrations enshrine this in acknowledging that the fishing industry is reliant on the ability to continue to fish in all current areas? In other words, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's important that the administrations, the Northern Ireland Assembly in particular, does what this bill says, because if it doesn't do that, then the Northern Ireland fishing organisation will find themselves at a disadvantage. Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for his question. It is indeed important that all our devolved administrations, as well as the UK government, are abiding by the agreement, and I thank him for his interest and his engagement in this important bill. I am really grateful as well to all of those who we have been engaging with through the passage of this bill and working closely with ministers and officials in the devolved governments. we agreed at the introduction of the bill that legislative consent motion that the legislative consent motion process is engaged for Scotland and Northern Ireland to varying extents by Part 2, 3 and 4 of the bill. The Government has been in sustained discussions with both of these devolved governments to seek consent for the bill, and I can confirm to the House that motions on consent have been passed by the Scottish Parliament and the Northern Ireland Assembly. Lord's Amendments 1 and 4 provide Scottish Ministers and Northern Ireland Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs with concurrent powers to make regulations within devolved competence corresponding to the powers to make provision granted to the Secretary of State under Clause 9 and Clause 11 of the Bill. Amendments 2 and 5 provide the procedure for those powers.
As one understands it, the BBMJ is dealing with matters primarily in international waters, and of course devolved institutions have no say in those matters. So as to broaden an understanding of the bill, what type of regulations is it anticipated that DERA, the local stormont department, would be making in consequence of this bill?
I thank the honourable member, and what I will say is that following the ratification of the agreement, that we will be participating in the future discussions in relation to the implementation of the agreement, and there will continue to be further conversations. I think the important point I do want to make, and I think this is relevant for the work we've been doing with Scotland, with Wales and with Northern Ireland, is that it does reflect how our UK government officials and devolved officials are already working together effectively in practice, and including in relation to consultation and effective delivery. And I know that these will be conversations that do continue. If I can continue with my remarks, Madam Deputy Speaker, in relation to Amendments 3 and 6, these place a duty on the Secretary of State to consult Scottish ministers and the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs in Northern Ireland before exercising powers in clauses 9 and 11, where regulations engaged devolve matters. This duty does not apply where the Secretary of State considers that regulations need to be made urgently for the purposes of implementing emergency measures adopted under Article 24(1) of the BBNJ agreement. This approach ensures that devolved governments are engaged in advance of regulations being made, enables them to make their own provision on devolved aspects where they wish to do so, and reflects their responsibilities while supporting timely and effective implementation of the agreement. Lord's Amendment 7, I will give way.
Shannon.
Speaker, the reason why I'm asking, because I've been asked these questions by the fishing organisations back home, I want to put them on the record, and I wish to just very quickly. The bill enables the creation of internationally agreed MPAs in the high seas. If a Northern Ireland vessel operates in these international waters, it may face new restrictions on where it can fish to protect vulnerable habitats and species like sharks and whales. Does the Minister not agree that we need to ensure that MPAs are not created without the fishing industry, that's the sector itself, the fishing organisations, the fish producers, and that their opinions carry weight and not simply just a checkbox exercise? I just want to put it on record, please, if you don't mind. Thank you.
I thank the honourable member, and indeed he does continue to put on the record his concerns, and he will know that as we move forward following ratification, there will be detailed conversations we will continue to have, and it is important that that the rules and regulations as we move forward will also be clear for all to be operating by. Madam Deputy Speaker, I was just referencing our approach and how we've been moving forward on the bill, and to ensure that devolved governments are engaged in advance of regulations being made, and that does enable them to be able to make their own provision on devolved aspects where they may wish to do so. And we continue to work closely together to support timely and effective implementation of the agreement. Lord's Amendment 7 inserts a new clause after Clause 17 that makes changes to the Marine Works Environmental Impact Assessment Scotland Regulations 2017 to ensure that the UK meets its obligations under the BBNJ agreement in relation to the Scottish marine licensable activities in areas beyond national jurisdiction. The UK Government will be amending its own environmental impact assessment regulations, and Scottish Government officials have worked closely with UK counterparts to draft corresponding provisions. Accordingly, Amendments 8 and 9 also limit the power in Clause 18 to only implementing Article 38 standards or guidelines, as a wider power is no longer required in light of other changes that will be made directly through the bill. Lord's Amendments 10 and 11 ensure that under Clause 22, which sets out procedures for the making of regulations under the Act, does not apply to regulations made under clauses introduced by Lord's Amendments 1 and 4. Instead, the procedures set out in Government Amendments 2 and 5 respectively apply. Finally, Lord's Amendment 12 amends Clause 25 so that the clause introduced by Amendment 7 comes into force on such a day as the Secretary of State appoints by regulations rather than upon royal assent. This change ensures a consistent approach across the bill with regards to the environmental impact assessment regulations that are being amended. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government's objective is to implement the BBNJ agreement effectively across the whole of the United Kingdom, and to do so in a way that respects the devolution settlement and supports continued constructive collaboration with devolved governments. I therefore commend these 12 Lord's amendments to the House, and I urge members to support them. I beg to move.
The question is that this House agrees with the Lord's Net Amendment 1. I call the Shadow Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. We on this side of the House recognise the importance of the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Bill and the shared international ambition to protect the world's oceans and marine ecosystems. The opposition supports the principle of effective global cooperation in this area, and we want this legislation to succeed. However, it is precisely because of the bill's significance, its reach across devolved administrations and its potential financial and regulatory consequences that it demands the highest standards of scrutiny and clarity. It is in that constructive spirit that I wish to raise a number of questions for the Minister today. I hope in the same constructive spirit she seeks to answer them fully. We know that the Government tabled quite a number of amendments to the bill at report stage in the House of Lords. Those amendments are before us today. I must say it is rather disappointing that the Government needed to do this at such a late stage in the bill's passage, and as my noble friend Lord Callanan said in the other place, tabling amendments at such a late stage was not conducive to the best Lord's scrutiny. Does the Minister accept that the work with the devolved administrations, which led to the tabling of these amendments, should have taken place earlier? And are lessons going to be learned for future legislation? On the new clauses, on the clauses consultation with Scotland and Northern Ireland to be inserted after clauses 9 and 12, can the Minister confirm that this definitely does not stray into legislative consent territory? Can the Minister also set out what would happen if Scottish or Northern Irish ministers do not approve of measures during the consultation process? Regarding the new clause to be inserted after clause 12 relating to the new regulation making power, what would happen if, say, the Scottish Government decided to take a divergent path or set up a system that puts itself at odds with the UK government position? Is there a risk to the operability of the system here? Madam Deputy Speaker, the government's own impact assessment found that this bill will generate compliance costs for those involved in the collection and utilisation of marine genetic resources and related digital sequence information. What steps are the government taking to ensure that these costs aren't prohibitive to the very research we are hoping to promote through the bill? While there are still many unanswered questions about enforcement, it is hard to see how the compliance, licensing and enforcement will be cheap. What level of resource is going to be put in to enforcing the regime? A Ways and Means resolution is required for this bill precisely because it will lead to costs to the public purse. So what assessment has the government made of the value for money in this respect, and what is the cost-benefit ratio? The final stage impact assessment also makes reference to potential future costs if emergency legislation is needed to respond to any further decisions by the Convention of Biological Diversity. Can the Minister clarify the parameters here? What it is they are anticipating, how much money do they assess might be involved, and are they planning to ensure the risk of unintended consequences is mitigated? Finally, it would be impossible not to mention the tension between the government's ambitions with this bill and its surrender of the Chagos Islands, which may well see the dismantling of an exemplar marine protected area. Can she tell us exactly what undertaking Mauritius has given to the MPA? Any red lines the government has clearly set out, and precisely what continuing role Britain will play in MPA management per terms of the treaty. For example, has the government had any discussions about preventing damaging Chinese trawler boats from accessing the MPA? Madam Deputy Speaker, we all share the objective of protecting our oceans and safeguarding biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. Indeed, that is why it was a Conservative government that first signed up to the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Agreement. But good intentions on their own are not enough. This House is entitled to clear answers on scrutiny, devolution, operability, cost, enforcement and value for money, as well as honesty about how this bill sits alongside the government's wider actions on marine protection in the British overseas territories. Until ministers can provide that clarity and reassurance, there remains a real risk that a bill designed to lead internationally will instead create uncertainty at home. I urge the Minister to fully respond to the questions raised today so that the House can be confident that this legislation is workable, proportionate and worthy of the ambitions the government has for it.
Chair of the Select Committee, Toby Perkins.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome this bill, the introduction of which had the happy coincidence of fulfilling one of the government's commitments and satisfying one of the Environmental Audit Committee recommendations at the same time. This landmark legislation will lay the groundwork for protecting the marine environment and the wildlife that inhabit it, which lie beyond the control of individual nations. As the government's National Security Assessment on Global Biodiversity Loss, published last week, set out in stark terms natural ecosystems such as the ocean and the Amazon rainforest are at risk of collapsing. The resulting crop failures, intensified natural disasters and conflict and political instability are highly likely, the report said, to threaten UK national security and prosperity. It is vital that the UK take leadership on the international stage to tackle global biodiversity loss and climate change. I welcome this government's commitment to multilateral cooperation on ocean governance, and I look forward to this bill receiving royal assent, enabling the UK to ratify the BBNJ agreement. It's absolutely true to say that the initial indication of the government supporting this agreement was made by the previous government. And I think it was disappointing that over the 18 months or so after that commitment was made, that we never actually got the legislation back here. And so I welcome the fact that this government has taken forward this important measure. The UK also makes an important contribution to global efforts to halt environmental decline through its international funding for climate finance, 1/3 of which is earmarked for nature-based solutions to climate change. However, to date, there has been limited indication of the government's next steps regarding the next 5-year ICF budget due to commence in April. And the government has also failed so far to invest in the Tropical Forests Forever facility and leverage further private finance into that innovative fund, protecting forests in perpetuity. So whilst the Minister has rightly championed our contribution to this impressive act of international cooperation, does she agree that we have more to do to ensure that we retain the UK's hard-earned reputation as a global leader in the field of international climate action? Can the Minister confirm that the UK will continue to contribute to protecting and restoring global ecosystems by maintaining its international funding for climate, including for nature projects in the next round of funding? So, in summary, Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome this important legislation that this government has acted on where previous governments merely talked about it, and look forward to them to continuing in this positive direction on the other areas I referred to.
Hear, hear, hear.
I call Liberal Democrat spokesperson Rose Savage.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Liberal Democrats strongly welcome this bill, and it's wonderful to hear the support for it from across this House. The Global Oceans Treaty is one of the most significant environmental agreements of our time. It is currently the world's only viable pathway to meeting the global 30 by 30 target to protect at least 30% of the world's oceans by 2030. And the scale of that challenge is monumental. Right now, less than 1% of the high seas is fully protected. That's less than 1 penny in the pound of the global ocean. And this is the gap that this treaty begins to close. The ocean underpins everything. It feeds billions of people, absorbs around 1/4 of global carbon emissions, regulates our weather and supports livelihoods across the world. Yet it's under extraordinary and growing pressure from overfishing, plastic pollution and climate change. I've seen those pressures firsthand. Rowing solo across 3 oceans, I saw both the beauty of the high seas and the damage that we're doing to them. Out there, beyond national borders, it can also feel beyond human laws. But this treaty is about bringing rules, responsibility and stewardship to those waters, and also discharges one of the commitments made by this government to me during the discussions around my private member's bill, the Climate and Nature Bill, and for that I thank them. While we, as Liberal Democrats, welcome the bill, we do regret the delay. The UK helped to negotiate this agreement, and it would have been fitting if we'd been among the first to ratify, rather than trailing behind. I want to thank the campaigners who've kept up the pressure, and colleagues from across my party have long championed ocean protection, including the Honourable Member for Bath, who's consistently made the case for stronger high seas governance, as has the Honourable Member for South Cambridgeshire.
Will she give way?
I will give way.
I thank her for giving way. I, like her, have spent quite a lot of time on the ocean, not rowing, but sailing. And when one sails across the oceans in small boats, one can't help but see seas of plastic, whether left by fishermen or just thrown overboard, carried on currents. Does she feel that this treaty goes far enough to tackle the scourge of plastic pollution in our oceans?
I thank my honourable and gallant colleague for his intervention. This treaty does not yet go far enough on plastic pollution, and I hope that the countries of the world will bring their best endeavours to achieve an international agreement on plastic pollution. Sadly, so far, those negotiations have not succeeded. I'd also like to take this opportunity to recognise the serious, constructive work of our Liberal Democrat peers. They chose not to delay ratification, but they did work hard to strengthen the bill. Lord Teverson pressed ministers on enforcement gaps, flags of convenience, illegal fishing and human rights at sea, reminding us that the high seas cannot be a legal vacuum for either nature or people. And Baroness Miller of Chilthorne-Domer pushed strongly on plastic pollution, especially plastic pellets that now turn up throughout the marine food chain. These issues have not gone away, and they now form the implementation agenda. As Lord Teverson observed during the Lords' debates, this may be one of the last major environmental agreements that we see from the United Nations for some time, given this era when respect for international law appears to be under strain in a way that we haven't seen for many decades now. That makes this treaty not just important, but precious. We are under a moral and existential obligation to make it work. So this ratification must be the start, not the finish. If the UK wants to lead, the government should aim to arrive at the first conference of the parties with a clear plan for implementation, which I would like to suggest to the Minister should include the publication of a proper implementation roadmap with timelines, responsibilities and funding so delivery does not drift. We should back our world-leading scientific institutions such as the National Oceanography Centre, the British Antarctic Survey and the Centre for Environment, Fisheries and Aquaculture Science. They should be fully supported to provide the evidence, training and technology transfer on which this treaty depends. We should strengthen enforcement using our satellite monitoring capability and our experience monitoring vast protected areas in the overseas territories. And as a priority, we should get our own maritime house in order. We cannot, in good conscience, call for protection overseas while allowing destructive practices like bottom trawling in our own MPAs. Credibility must start at home. And at a time when multilateral cooperation often feels fragile, this treaty shows what is still possible when countries work together to protect the global commons. The Liberal Democrats will support this bill, but future generations will not judge us on whether we ratified a treaty. They will judge us on whether the oceans are healthier because we did something. So let's match warm words with hard action and show that Britain still leads when it matters, not just signing agreements, but protecting the blue parts of our planet, which give us food to eat and oxygen to breathe. To quote Sir David Attenborough, who turns 100 this coming May, if we save our sea, we save our world. Thank you.
Sarah Champion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As Chair of APPGs for the Ocean, I am delighted to see the bill's swift passage through Parliament, and I look forward to its full ratification. But I've got some specific points from the Minister. Can the Minister outline the timeline for the next steps to ensure ratification? Specifically, will it happen ahead of the first Ocean COP expected later this year? If the Minister is unable to detail today, would she be willing to meet with the APPG for the Ocean to discuss the timeline, particularly given that we are now 5 years away from our 30 by 30 commitment? Turning to the amendments laid in the other place, I note that the noble Baroness Lady Boycott put forward an amendment that would have ensured that the polluter pays and precautionary principles, alongside other principles in the Environment Act 2021, must be applied by UK authorities when they exercise powers or duties relating to the high seas under this bill. As the amendment did not pass, there are concerns across the ocean sector that there is no statutory requirement in the bill itself to extend these environmental principles beyond the UK's territorial or domestic jurisdiction. I wonder if the Minister is able to comment on that. Can the Minister offer assurances that when representatives of the government or public authorities act under this bill in relation to the high seas, they will apply the UK's existing environmental principles so that we do have that coverage? Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I also thank honourable members for their contributions. If I could make a couple of comments in relation to the matters raised about the timing of the amendments in the other place. I think firstly to mention that discussions were continuing to be ongoing with our devolved governments as well about how we would be moving forward on the bill together. And it is important to recognise the respect for devolution settlements and adherence also to principles underpinning the Sewell Convention that are the core aims of this government and how we're working. And so I referenced the way in which we've been working closely with Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland as we move forward. And that was part of the reason for some of the delays in order to get those agreements for how we move forward together. If I may also make reference, or I'll just make another reference, if I may also make reference to the importance of needing to move ahead quickly with this bill to ensure that we have a seat at the table for discussions with other parties to the agreement, including on MPAs. And we also wanted to ensure the bill's provisions in devolved areas were watertight. And that's why we had those constructive conversations with devolved governments. If I could just make a reference as well in relation to fishing. Part 2 obligations do not apply to fishing, but I know the honourable member has left his place, but he can reassure that the Northern Ireland Assembly will have concurrent powers to implement provision in areas of devolved competence. And in Part 3 of the bill, the UK will be involved in MPA decisions and will carefully consider the impacts on fishing. In relation to comments that were raised in regard to multilateral cooperation, I do want to mention some of the ways in which we continue to work with other states to support ratification. We continue to be proactive in preparing for implementation of the BBNJ agreement and are committed to partnering with others, including with the Global South, to ratify and to implement the agreement. And indeed, the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office has worked with the Commonwealth Secretariat to support smaller member countries with their implementation work. And the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs also published research to develop a shortlist of potential area-based management tools, including marine protected areas that could be proposed once the agreement is in force. I was asked as well by the honourable member, my honourable friend, the honourable member for Rotherham, about the process of the bill. I made some remarks, but I may, with permission, make some further remarks in relation to this. Following the passage of the bill, we will be laying 2 statutory instruments, one of which will define digital sequence information for the purposes of the BBNJ Act, and the other, along with an associated Scottish Government SI, will amend the marine licensing regime where needed to implement Part 4 of the BBNJ agreement on environmental impact assessments. These will be progressed as soon as the BBNJ bill has received royal assent. And once these SIs have been passed, we will be able to ratify the agreement and do so by laying the instrument of ratification formally at the United Nations in New York. We are keen to see this happen as quickly as possible, as I know my honourable friend is as well. I do just want to make a reference to the legislative consent motions, and I think the Shadow Minister did ask about this in his remarks, and to say that yes, while foreign affairs and treaty making are reserved matters, implementing international obligations in domestic law is not reserved where those obligations concern devolved areas. Several provisions in the bill, particularly those in relation to parts 2, 3 and 4, relate to matters such as environmental protection and scientific research, which fall within the devolved competence in Scotland and Northern Ireland, and consequently the legislative consent motion process is engaged to varying degrees. And it has been the case that the assessment of whether the legislative consent motion is required for this bill has been agreed across the relevant UK government departments, including Scotland, Northern Ireland and Welsh offices, and in consultation with the devolved governments. Now, the Honourable Member also, the Shadow Minister, the Honourable Member also asked if there is a risk that requirements for an environmental impact assessment in Scotland for marine activities in areas beyond national jurisdiction might be different to one in other parts of the United Kingdom. It is the case that Scotland could choose to implement the requirements slightly differently, and we will be continuing to work closely with the Scottish Government to ensure that differences are kept to a minimum and that the United Kingdom as a whole is taking a consistent approach. What I will say is that is very much in the spirit in which we have been working collaboratively to respect devolution settlements, but recognise the importance of this agreement to both the Scottish Government and also to the United Kingdom Government. And I think that that has been an important part of how we've progressed. I will give way very quickly.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. On that point of, and I thank the Minister for answering the question that I raised around the potential for the Scottish Government to take a divergent way in the way that they implement this. If ongoing conversations are underway, can the Minister indicate whether there has been an indication given from the Scottish Government that they are in fact going to want to implement this in a slightly or more different way?
I thank the Honourable Member for his question. What I will say is that we are at the start of the process, and the spirit in which we have been working and the way in which we have reached agreement on how to be working alongside the Scottish Government is an important principle of how we would continue to work going forward. And I do believe, in light of those conversations, that a collaborative approach will continue, because that is in all of our interests as well. If I could just make some further comments in relation to the Honourable Member speaking for the Liberal Democrats, the Honourable Member for South Cotswolds. If I can make a reference to plastic pollution, I think it's important to reference this. It is important to, I know, members on all sides of the House, that there is a separate process underway to agree a global plastic pollution treaty. And plastic pollution is a transboundary issue with its source on land, with its, and it is appropriate for this to be addressed by a bespoke treaty that can address the full life cycle of plastics, and including phasing out problematic products, improving waste management and reducing leakage. The BBNJ agreement focuses on conservation and sustainable use of resources in areas beyond national jurisdiction, and therefore is not best suited to address plastics pollution across the life cycle. But she makes an important point, and it is a matter of concern across the House. I will say as well, I will give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you to the Minister. I very much welcome the Government's commitment to global leadership on protecting the oceans by bringing forward this bill and so quickly through Parliament. Last week I joined Greenpeace on board their vessel Witness, which is docked nearby in London, and heard about the devastation that bottom trawling can wreak on marine ecosystems. Can the Minister outline what steps the Government is taking to regulate, or preferably to ban, this destructive fishing practice in our marine protected zones and elsewhere, as it is a particular area of concern for my residents in Exeter?
I thank my honourable friend, and it is indeed a matter of concern as it has been raised in debates across the House. And whilst he will know that bottom trawling is not within the scope of the agreement, separately he will also, I think, be aware that we are consulting on restricting bottom trawling in more vulnerable marine habitats. And it is important that that consultation and that work continues. I will just come to a conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, to say that this is a landmark piece of legislation. It does ensure that the UK can ratify the important BBNJ agreement and take full part in the Conference of the Parties. It contains measures that will not only safeguard marine ecosystems, they will also deliver real benefits for the UK's research and innovation community. In January, I was also pleased to visit the National Oceanography Centre, which the Honourable Member also referenced in her comments. I visited them in Southampton, a world-leading institution which highlighted the value of this agreement in improving the visibility and the transparency of UK-led marine research, as well as strengthening international research collaborations. And I do want to put on record my thanks to them for their work and their leadership. And to conclude, I am sure that honourable members would agree that the health of our ocean is inseparable from the health of our planet. And although we may not often see these ecosystems with our own eyes, the responsibility to protect them falls on all of us and on the wider international community. The BBNJ Bill is the UK's opportunity to rise to that responsibility, to safeguard fragile ecosystems, to support sustainable development, and to ensure that the benefits of ocean science are shared fairly and responsibly. The United Kingdom has always played a leading role in advancing global ocean governance. With this bill, we have the chance to continue that leadership. The ocean cannot wait, and nor, Madam Deputy Speaker, should we.
The question is that this House agrees with the Lords in their Amendment 1. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. With the leave of the House, I call the Minister to move that this House agrees with their Lords in their Amendments 2 to 12. The question is that this House agrees with the Lords in their Amendments 2 to 12. As many as of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.